Hi everyone, I'm Joe Durkheising and welcome to Rumble in the Jungle. Today's guest is my friend Geno Morelli. Geno is a former wrestler from the prolific Penn State wrestling program under head coach and Olympic gold medalist Cael Sanderson. In 2019, he was a U.S. Open and World Team Trials Semi-Finalist. In 2021, he won IBJJF Pan American Championships and World Championships. And if you guys haven't seen that, you can see the matches on Flow. In Worlds, he won all of his matches without getting a single point scored on him, and he beat some tough up-and-comers like J-Rod, Nicky Rod's younger brother, and ADCC Trials champion. He's also an undefeated MMA fighter and 2 weight division champion at amateur, and professionally he's 2-0 with 2 finishes, 1 via TKO and 1 via submission. And outside of his athletic accomplishments, he's earned his BA and MBA from Penn State, and he's the co-founder and CEO of Athletes Ocean. And Geno, I think that's it's probably the longest list of accomplishments we've had for any guest. But welcome to the show, my brother. It's good to have you.
Thanks, dog. I'm surprised you didn't introduce me as Meatball Morelli.
Meatball Morelli, yes, that's his. I'm trying to get him to have that as his fight name. So far, he's dragging his feet on that one, but we'll see. I'm working the long game here.
Better than Domingo's suggestions.
Yeah, so these are my 2 thoughts. We got Meatball Morelli, and we also got Hands of Steel. For those of you who don't know, he broke his hand in his last MMA fight. Yep, right there, and he's got a metal plate in there. So I'm thinking Hands of Steel it's literal, and I think it's fitting with this guy.
Dude, that's actually not bad. We'll see what happens.
If you guys have any suggestions, go to his Instagram and give them to him because he's always looking for new ideas.
None have stood out yet. None have stood out yet. So
do me a favor, comment on all of his photos, Meatball Morelli. Let's make this one stick. Okay, so let's maybe start in chronological order here. So Geno, you have quite a background in wrestling. You've been wrestling for, nearly 2 decades here. So let's start there. Tell me about how you got into wrestling and if there's any other sports you're kind of doing growing up.
Yeah, so I actually got in really late. So most of the folks I wrestled with in college, they were wrestling since they were 5. That's kind of how it works in Pennsylvania. People start really young. And my dad actually wrestled in college. He wrestled at the Olympic trials and things. He was a really good college wrestler. Never did anything crazy on the senior level. But my brother wrestled in college as well, so it was just kind of a family thing. But my dad actually didn't want me to start young just because he saw what the youth programs are like and like the pressure that was put on kids. And you'd be going to any tournament in Pennsylvania that you went to, you'd see kids crying and like parents yelling at them. It was kind of wild. So I actually didn't compete until I was in 6th grade and really actually started competing in 7th grade. So that's sort of where how I got started, as a family thing.
Was it one of those things where, you saw your older brother and your dad wrestling and you always wanted to?
Yeah, I mean, my dad coached, so I was always going to the practices, but was never paying attention to technique. I was just running around like swinging on like monkey bars and stuff in the room. But then, yeah, I mean, I always knew I was going to wrestle, but when I was young, I was more focused on baseball and played baseball up until I was like 12 or 13. Probably could have pursued that as a sport, but as soon as I started wrestling, I was a really energetic kid. So just the aggression and like the individualistic nature of the sport made me sort of, migrate more over there. It just like vibed with my personality better and kind of, I feel like gave me more freedom to express myself and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so 6th, 7th grade, that's kind of around middle school. That's when you got into competing. I'm assuming you started competing for your middle school?
Yeah. So in middle school, I think you could join the team when you were in 6th grade, but you couldn't actually be a starter on the team until 7th grade. So that 6th grade year was my first year. I actually went to like a whole year of practice. And then 7th grade was the first time I actually got to start competing for the team.
Yeah, that's cool. I remember when I was in 6th grade, I always wanted to wrestle. I thought it was like, I was into like professional wrestling, like the WWE. And then I was like, oh,
Nice.
wrestling will be cool. And I showed up to the first practice, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna have to run 2 miles before practice. And I was like, I was like, okay, wrestling's not for me. In
Yeah,
retrospect, I wish I would have pushed through, but having to run every day is what actually made me not pursue it. I was like, I'll stick to skateboarding.
yeah,
Uh,
it's a tough sport for sure. I mean, compared to other sports, especially, I think the hardest years of wrestling for me was when I was in high school. Once I got to
yeah.
college, it actually got easier, I would say.
What
But in
was
high
so hard
school,
about it in high school?
I think it was just my mentality at the time. Like, um, and I think it was not really understanding all the intricacies of training and how to set up like a professional training schedule. And so I you know, made up for a lot of that with just working really hard. So like for instance, in high school I would practice and pretty much every day after practice I'd go home, get in a sauna suit and run 3 to 4 miles. And that's usually just to keep my weight down because I always cut a lot of weight. Um, so and then I would always go in before school and lift at like 6 a.m. starting I think that was starting my junior year. So I had some really, I'd say especially my junior and senior year of high school, definitely like the hardest I've ever trained in my life.
Yeah, I remember that being one of the things about the students at our school who wrestled is they were constantly just struggling with the weight cut. Like I remember there being kids in class who had like water bottles and they're just like spitting in it all day trying to lose a little bit of weight and they can never eat what they want to eat and it was just it looked very miserable. But I think it's also what makes wrestlers so mentally strong is you guys are constantly every single weight or every single week cutting weight. You're competing all the time. You go to a tournament on the weekend and you get like, a handful of matches that are really hard and grueling, especially because, the mentality in wrestling is to go, especially the American mentality is to go like 100% as hard as you can and just freaking grind.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah. So, I mean, I'm guessing it's one of those things where like you wouldn't want to do it again, at least not that way. But mentally, you probably learned a lot during that time, I'd imagine.
100%. Yeah, this is something I've talked with a lot of other wrestlers about. I think a lot of other guys had similar experiences. Like I know my business partner Nolf, he had the same thing. His schedule in high school was crazy. But yeah, it definitely makes you tougher. But once you start to learn smarter ways to train, uh, I think it's good that I went through that. But especially now, like getting older and just your body not recovering or as quickly, you got to sort of adapt and start picking up new ways to train and smarter ways to train.
So I'm sure you get a lot of young athletes asking you all the time, what advice do you have for them? So if you had like, a middle school age kid or a high school age kid who wanted to know like, what advice do you have? What lessons do you learn that you could pass on that they could benefit from? What would you tell them?
So there's a couple, and I'd say these apply to wrestling and jujitsu. But one thing that I would change if I were to go back is I wouldn't have cut more than like 5 pounds. Um, so my senior year is in college is like the least amount of weight I've cut, and it was the most fun I had, the most I've ever learned in a season, and the best I've ever competed. So that would be number one is just look to have fun with it and try not to cut weight because you'll start focusing on the weight rather than like learning and developing techniques and having fun. Um, what else? So I'd say that's the biggest thing, and then try to compete as much as possible and don't worry about the result as much. Like when I was young, man, if I lost, I'd throw a fit until I started getting older in like my later years of high school, because I wanted to win so bad and I wasn't really focused on how I was competing. I was just focused on the result of competing. So, um, but that was another thing. I didn't compete as much as I should have when I was young. So most of the kids that wrestled in college, they would compete like all throughout the summers from the time they were like 6 up until the end of their high school career. And that's something that I never did. When I was in the summers, like I wouldn't really compete at all until my junior year. I did one or two tournaments in the summer, and that was about it. So I would say try and
Yeah.
compete as much as possible, focus on having fun, and don't worry about cutting weight.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think you see that same thing in a lot of different sports. Like even if you just look at the Muay Thai fighters in Thailand, you'll have kids who will fight the same way that kids here grow up wrestling. They'll grow up fighting Muay Thai, and they'll fight, every weekend, every 2 weeks, and they don't really cut a lot of weight. but by the time they're 18, so by the time they'd be the age where like they'd go to some kind of college wrestling program, it's the same thing. They'll have like 200 or 300 fights under their belt. And then when they go against someone who has like 20 fights under their belt, they're just so far ahead of in experience, and they've seen so much and they're so calm. I think that's what makes some of the biggest differences with some of those fighters. I think you're right. Same
100%.
thing as with kids. And yeah, it kind of seems like with wrestling, and I guess anything where you compete, performance anxiety is one of those things that you can get, and that can actually hold you back from competing, which will hold you back from making uh, all the gains you could be making and like kind of realizing your full potential. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's really good advice.
100%.
Now,
Some of the, like, most of the best people I've ever seen in terms of when it comes to competition, it's just because they can go out there relaxed. And it almost looks like they're just sparring. A good example would be that Strickland fight. Like you could just kind of
oh
tell
yeah,
his nature and like he was just so calm in there. It looked like he was at practice. So if you can get to the point where you're like that, I think the only way to get there is to just continue to put yourself out there in competition. And I didn't start actually developing that until really late in my college career. I'd say my senior year. So
yeah, yeah. That fight, by the way, was so freaking good. I was expecting Strickland to just get his ass kicked,
me
and
too.
when he dropped him in the first round with that right hand, I was like, holy shit, he's about to finish him right now. That was like my head almost exploded. That was so wild. And
Yeah,
being an American, I wanted to see him win and do well, but I was not expecting that. And I think his approach was so smart too. He was really just kind of like inching into Adesanya's space. He wasn't backing up at all, and he wasn't like rushing in where you get caught with something. He was kind of inching in and then looking just to pressure him. And as soon as Adesanya was getting his back foot to the cage, he wasn't really able to to slip back and move out of the way, and that's where he started to land some of his best shots. It was it was a beautiful strategy and a beautiful fight. I was really impressed with that.
dude, I wasn't even gonna buy the pay-per-view. I was like, Adesanya's gonna knock this dude out in the first round. Like, there's not many other good fights on the card, but we ended up buying it. And dude, it was like one of the best fights I've seen. So
Yeah, it was
he
so
he
good.
had a perfect game plan.
Yeah, his defense was incredible too. Like he was so good about just I think part of it was maybe like the range he was keeping, where he was just like everything. He was far enough away we could see stuff coming, and he was like shots were landing, but they're landing against his guard, and then he was just constantly pressuring him. And I think that pressure makes Adesanya feel a little uncomfortable because a lot of his best fights he kind of like freezes people and they don't move, and then he's at the range where if they come towards him, he can slip back and land a counter. But he was kind of outside of that range. It was good. It was exciting to see, and we brought another
Yeah,
belt home to USA, baby. Let's go.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean his checking the kicks too, I think was huge. Adesanya
Yeah,
was trying to rely really heavy on those leg kicks, and he was just lifting that front leg up every time. So
yeah. Uh, so yeah, so back to your wrestling career. So at a certain point, you kind of had a realization that you probably had the capability of competing in college, and you wanted to compete in college. So when was it that you kind of started to think about that and knew that you wanted to extend your athletic career uh, post high school? And then how did you end up at your first college program, and what was that transition like from high school wrestling to being a collegiate athlete?
yeah, so I'd say my sophomore year is when things started to pick up for me. I actually didn't qualify for the state tournament that year, but uh, I got upset in the regional tournament. But that's when I started actually becoming competitive at the state level. And then I think at the end of my sophomore year, I got connected with a D1 All American from that wrestled at Bucknell. He had moved back to our hometown, and he spent a lot of time just helping me. So I'd go in, and that's when I started like actually lifting. So I was basically doing a college lifting program as a sophomore in high school because I'd go in with him, I think 3 or 4 days a week before I'd go into high school, like for my classes and stuff. So get up at like 6 a.m., lift with him, practice afterwards, and then work with him for like 30 minutes to an hour after practice. And that's when I made huge strides. So my junior year, I was certain I was going to wrestle in college. So so yeah, and then that's when I started taking it a little bit more seriously. So my junior summer, I wrestled at Super 32. made it to the semifinals of that, which is basically like the national tournament for high school, and lost a close match in the semi, so almost made the finals, and that's when I knew for sure I was going to start getting offers. And then the next week, I started getting called by a bunch of schools, and that's sort of where it all kicked off.
So you started to get offers at that point. Did it take you a while to decide on which university you wanted to go to, or how was that process? What made you decide to go at Pittsburgh initially?
So the crazy thing was Super 32 was really close to the signing deadline, and I wanted to like sign and get it over with, so I didn't have to think about it
Okay.
my senior year. So
Yeah.
I think after that tournament, I had like 2 weeks before I had to sign. So my dream school was always Penn State, but I guess in my mind I had never thought like that I could get a great scholarship there. So like finances was a big thing for me, just because I didn't grow up with a ton of money or from a rich family. So it's like, man, it'd be great to get most of my school paid for. So Penn State had hit me up, but I think I chatted with them, and like the max scholarship I could have gotten for the first year was like 10 to 20%. They don't really, unless you're like the top recruit coming out of high school, they won't give people full rides. I think the maximum that people will get is like maybe 50%. And then if they all American, then they move them up to 100% after that. But University of Pittsburgh had hit me up, a couple other schools, and I wanted to stay pretty close to home. So I had went and visited Pitt, and the other school I visited was Bucknell. And Pitt gave me like a better financial offer than Bucknell. And so I just kind of made a decision like on a whim, and that's how I ended up landing there. They gave me a really good financial offer and pretty much got almost my entire school paid for.
So what was that transition like to college wrestling and wrestling your first year at that level? Because that's also a big jump in competition. You go from going against high school kids, which in your area was very, very competitive, but now you're looking at competing against the best wrestlers in the country. So what was that like? And also as a freshman, you're not as physical as like some of those juniors and seniors at the college level.
Yeah. So that's the thing for me that I think was pretty rare. When I got to college, I had already had like 2 years of college weightlifting program under my belt. So I went in and was immediately like competitive with everyone on the team. But that doesn't happen for a lot of like freshmen that go into college. So I would say that when it came to wrestling in the room, I was very competitive. So I think that true freshman year, I wrestled off Tyler Wilps for the 165-pound spot. I think Tyler was maybe going into his sophomore or junior year, but the next year he was in like the semis or the finals of nationals. So, and I think he might have All American that year. So I went in and beat him off at the wrestle offs as a true freshman, but then decided to redshirt just to get experience under my belt. So that year I didn't really compete too much, but was finding a lot of success in the room really early on. And I think the credit goes to like being very physical coming into the college wrestling world, having like 2 years of weightlifting experience.
Yeah, so you wrestled at 165, so that's kind of a similar weight to what you'd be at now. So were you almost the same size you are now, your freshman year of college?
Yeah, I've pretty much been the same size since the end of my junior year of high school. So,
Ah,
um,
okay.
and like the same physique too. I basically looked exactly the same from just like my size since then. So
Got those meatball genetics.
that's right, dude.
And about the physicality, I'll say this. So Gino, of course, is one of the most technical wrestlers I've ever wrestled with, or he is the most technical wrestler I've had the chance to wrestle with. But physically, he's incredibly strong. I probably outweigh Gino by like 50 pounds when I wrestle with him. He feels like he's stronger than me. So uh,
Oh yeah, right, dude. Don't give me
it's
that.
a yeah. So it's got to be something to do with the weightlifting, but also just some people are born with that good physicality. Um, so you wrestled at Pittsburgh. Was that for 1 year or 2 years? I know you redshirted that first year.
So I was there for 2.5. So I redshirted.
Okay.
Next year I competed, and um, I mentioned to you that I didn't really get great at competing until my senior year in college. So kind of had mixed success. I beat a couple All-Americans as a true freshman, but um, didn't end up even making the national tournament that year. And then my redshirt sophomore year, so going like this is my third year in school.
What did
I
that just sorry, quick question. What do you think led to that? Because you were you're in the room beating guys who were wrestling at that semifinal level at the national tournament, but you didn't quite place that. Do you think that was more of a just still learning how to compete? Like physically you had everything you needed, but you're still trying to figure out the competitive game?
100%. Yeah. Physically and technically, everything was there. It was more what I was focusing on going into competition and then just not being present when I was competing because uh, I don't know exactly what it was. I mean, whether you call it like competition anxiety or whatever, it's just for me, it was me not being present when I was on the mat. And I think that really just came down to getting more competition experience because that was the one thing I was missing versus every other college wrestler pretty much. They competed all throughout the summers and in middle school, high school, and everything. And I had never done that just because I had not taken the sport, I guess, as seriously as a young age. But I made up for it with just athletic ability and being able to learn things really quickly. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think it was just overall just competition experience.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to. I think most people who have competed in any individual sport have like had the experience where they've gone out and they feel like they didn't put what they were capable of out there on the mat or the stage or wherever they are. I think it's very relatable. But it's interesting to see your growth because you went from that time where you kind of had uh, a deficit in your competitive experience to now. I've seen you before a couple of fights, and you're one of the most calm people I've ever seen before fights. Like you're just kind of like smiling, you're listening to like Motown music, you're kind of like just, getting in the zone, but you'll be like smiling and happy and just like chilling. And then you go out there and you like turn someone into a bloody mess. And it's like a very interesting, it's very interesting to see like how kind of calm and like focused you are now. Um,
Yeah, it's
but
come a long way for sure.
Yeah. So then the kind of next phase of your college career is you went to Penn State. So what was it like in your transition to that? 'Cause that's also another big change.
Yeah. So um, the move to Penn State really came. Uh, so that was my junior year. Had some life circumstances happen. Wanted to move closer to home, um, and always wanted to go to Penn State, but never really like made the decision just for financial reasons. But ended up sort of learning that money isn't the most important thing, and so um, made the transition and like I knew right away that that was where I was supposed to be, just from a cultural standpoint, and it showed me the importance of like surrounding yourself with good people that have the same values. And that room is probably the most like concentrated room potentially in the world of just focused, dedicated athletes that have really good values. So once I got there, everything just started sort of clicking. But when I first transferred there, I think a week before I made the decision to transfer, I tore my pec. So went in there injured, but was still having a great time from the get go.
Wow. So 2 weeks before you're supposed to go there, you tore your pec.
Yeah,
What were you thinking at that time? Were you just like, great, this is perfect timing?
dude, man, I
That's
went
got to
through
be
some
some
tough.
stressful times.
Yeah, I went through some tough stuff leading up to that, and I guess I'll share those. So first thing, I think Danielle, so my wife Danielle, we had been dating since I've been 17, so it's been a while now. But we had broken up like for a short stint for like a week, and that happened about 2.5 weeks before the transfer.
Oh
And
no.
then yeah, and then my dad actually had an accident and had passed 5 days after that. So got hit with that, and then about I think it was a week later I had tore my pec. So the term like when it rains it pours, that really happened to me, and so it just kind of put life in perspective for me. I was like, dang, like I'm at this place where I don't really get along with the people that I'm around, like they don't have the same values, um, and was kind of out of my element in Pittsburgh because I'm from a really small town, and uh, I guess just the whole culture of the city didn't really jive with me. So then just sort of took a step back, looked at life, and then it helped me ultimately like make a decision to pursue exactly what I wanted to do, which was to go to Penn State.
What do you think gave you the strength at that time? Because I'm just thinking, like, you had three major life events happen to you, like back to back to back in like a week's time.
Yeah, I think, man, I don't know. I think looking back, I would say God definitely had his hand like on my life at that time, even though I wasn't a believer. Um, I think he had helped sort of put the right people in place. I'd gotten some calls from some people that I knew that were connected to Penn State, um, and that just sort of opened up the doorway for the possibility. I don't even, to be honest, I don't remember exactly how that all went down, but I know that I had gotten a phone call from an individual that was connected to the program, and I just talked through him like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, and that like doors just kind of opened up to to make that happen. It was really weird now that I look back, but I think God was definitely at work there, even though I didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah. So 2 weeks after that, that's when you joined Penn State. So were you not signed at the time you tore your pec?
Yeah, so exactly. I was still at Pitt, tore my pec, and then I took like I still maybe it took about a week before I made my decision. And I just
Yeah.
remember like having that conversation with my head coach was something that was really tough at the time.
Oh, that's always
Um,
so hard.
man, yeah. I
Two
mean,
breakups.
exactly, yeah. So I think like right before I left Pitt, Danielle and I got back together, so at least there was that. And then yeah, and then I had the conversation with my coach and just sort of like made the decision on a whim again. And then got up to Penn State and obviously wasn't training right away, but got started with classes and everything. And yeah, everything just started going up from there.
Yeah. So I guess tell me about your time at Pitt. Uh, what are some of the things that you kind of feel like you learned that's unique to your time that you spent there? Um, like obviously that's around the time that you really felt like you rounded the corner in your competitive mindset. But I'm sure there's plenty of other lessons there. So what are some of the kind of major themes that you took from your time there?
So I think the biggest thing was just seeing how a value-driven team uh, makes an impact. So one thing at Penn State, everyone kind of wonders what the secret is, and
I
it
wasn't gonna
really comes,
ask, but I was like, what's the secret sauce? You gotta let us know.
yeah, it really comes down to like a value-driven team and the leadership of the team, right? So we have Coach Cael, who kind of he's the head, and then the other coaching staff is just they're all bought into the same value system, and they teach really good like eternal life principles, and that's kind of what drives the way we do things at the program. So a big one is gratitude, and then like some other ones are having fun and not taking the sport too seriously, like making sure that we're all there to win and win national titles and things like that, but like we play dodgeball every day before practice starts, like that type of culture. So
Yeah.
um, and that's something that I haven't seen anywhere else. Like it's very unique to that team. So I learned a lot about just values and um, like eternal principles that kind of transcend sports and careers and everything, just like principles that make you successful in life. And I'd say those are the biggest things that I took away from that program. So
So yeah, so life principles and dodgeball. These are the secrets.
yeah,
All wrestling programs out there, you know what to do.
yeah, and
uh,
obviously from like a technical standpoint, I took away so many things when it comes to just training and wrestling itself, wrestling principles, and um, so obviously, Coach Cael, Olympic gold medalist. Then we have Casey Cunningham, who is less known, but probably one of the best technical wrestling coaches in the world. Then we got Cael's brother, Cody Sanderson, and then we get to wrestle with like all the Olympic guys because they have the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club there. So you're surrounded by the best technical wrestlers in the world, and all of them just have good attitudes and like want to help. So that's a very special environment. So you're going to obviously learn the best techniques and like the best way to train. Um,
yeah.
so being exposed to that was really helpful, obviously, and that's something that really helps me in my MMA career too, because I know how to do the strength training now and optimize that for myself. and I know how to train properly. Just like basically the training principles of how to best train, those transcend every martial art. So it's almost the same for striking, for jiu-jitsu, and for wrestling. So
Yeah.
sort of knowing how to structure my practices was really big. Um, and then just sort of getting guidance on, I think the biggest thing for me that was like getting guidance on what to focus on when you go and compete. And a lot of people, like we talked about earlier, focus on results um, but it's like going out there and just like being present and focusing on, what you need to do in that moment. And I think that's made such a big difference. And now that ever since I started competing after college, that's really helped me out, and I feel like really refined that now moving into MMA.
So you said one thing that I can definitely really relate to. So you mentioned gratitude, feeling grateful. And for me, that's one of the things that for the past 3, 4 years, every time I go to compete, whether it's MMA or jiu-jitsu, I always remind myself, like constantly before I'm competing, like to be grateful that like I'm healthy enough to do this. I'm living in a time and a place where I can do this, and I'm able to do it at this level. And that's something that I think, for at least for me, does a lot to alleviate any kind of anxiety, because it's hard to feel anxious when you're feeling grateful and like fortunate to be doing what you're doing. And you also mentioned that, and I'm wondering that obviously must have also come from the folks around you, and then from Cael and the coaches there. Um, in terms of the kind of competitive mindset, it's interesting because it really feels like there is no one size fits all. I've seen people have like vastly different competitive mindsets and be successful. But from your perspective, I guess what are some of the commonalities that amongst all the different types of mindsets you've seen elite athletes have that you've been around, what are some things that you notice that are similar? And then what are some of the maybe most surprising differences you've noticed?
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of different things, right? And this was something that Coach Cael would talk about a lot. You see, you know, the program always preached to do the right things. Like one example is, don't go out and party and drink alcohol, because that never really leads to good things. But you'd see certain people that would do that, and they would still just be absolute killers and find success. But
The John Jones
but
of the world.
exactly. But at the same time, if you look like from a long-term perspective, almost all of those people end up running into like major challenges, and don't they often don't find like long-term sustained success. So the people that I've seen that have found that long-term sustained success, usually they're following good principles and not doing those things. Um, and some other commonalities of those folks that just really stand out would be self-confidence, like believing 100% that when they go in there, they're gonna not only win, but freaking smoke people. Like you can't just have the mindset of going in and trying to win close matches. All like the legends from Penn State that have just dominated people in competition, they all went into like tech fall people. They didn't go in to just win 1 point matches. And then the other thing is, always operating from that mindset of gratitude, which helps just lift your spirit up. And um, yeah, I don't really. It's kind of like it seems like such a lofty thing, and it's kind of hard to explain, but it really does just make you feel spirited and brings like a different energy to you. Um, I'd say those are the biggest things, like confidence, and then competing with gratitude, and then not wrapping up your identity in the results and in the sport itself, and just understanding like having a good perspective on what you're actually doing, right? So our coaches would talk about like how lucky we are to get to do this. I mean, there's people out there that whether you know there's so many other things that we could be doing, right? And we get to actually go out, compete, wrestle in front of thousands of people. So I think just having that mindset is something I've seen in pretty much everybody that's had really good success.
Yeah, the confidence is is a really interesting one too, because you're right. All the greats in all the sports are very, very confident. You look at like the John Jones, he never looks like he's ever concerned with anybody. Even when he moved up to heavyweight and fought uh, Cyril Gahn. He looked like super calm the entire time, took him down and just smoked him. Um, and you look at people like Gordon Ryan in Jiu-Jitsu. You look at Nicholas Marigali. Like they're always very, very confident. An interesting thing about confidence, though, and I've heard Danaher speak on this recently, and it was kind of interesting. Danaher says that uh, he doesn't try to like teach anyone any tricks to be confident. He feels like one of the best ways to become confident is to do well in the training room. If you're in a good training room with good competitors and you're training hard and you're doing well on a daily basis, then you kind of start to know where you're at. And then when you go to a competition, you don't have to pretend to be confident because you know you're good. Um, it's just kind of like an interesting thought on that. And I assume it's probably the same way with the Penn State room. If you're in there and you're wrestling well with national champions, you're wrestling well with U.S. Open champions, with Olympians, you don't have to like guess if you're good enough and try to trick yourself. Like you know what level you're at because you're competing at that level on a daily basis.
Yeah, yeah, that's one nice thing about, being in those environments where you're training with the best in the world. I know you're experiencing that now at New Wave, but um, that was one thing that was kind of surprising for me is I was competing with our best guys in the room and finding success there, but I really never translated it to competition during my college career, which was always interesting for me. I was kind of always wondering what was going on, and then self-reflecting back on that, I think it was just overall experience in competition. But it definitely does go a long way. Like if you're, if you're training with the best in the world, they're going out and tech falling people that you later have to wrestle. It does give you like a certain level of confidence when you go into those matches.
Yeah. So your time at Penn State, you spent was it 4 or 5 years there?
So I did 2.5 years of undergrad. Um,
Okay.
so my first year I was injured. My next year was my junior year, redshirt junior year. Uh, Jason Nolf was at the weight below me at 157. Bo was above me at 174. That was when we had like
What a
our
crazy
middleweights.
time. There's no moving
Dude,
up and down.
yeah, our middleweights to like, and then below Nolf we had Zane Rutherford. Below that we had I'm like blanking right now, but it was basically, I think we had like five or six national champs, or sorry, five national champs, and they were all pretty much from the middleweights to like 184. It was crazy. But yeah, so then that concentrated all the other guys into 165 that year, all the other tough guys on the team. So I think it was me, Shakur Rashid, who I think he was a national semifinalist the next year. And then we had Garrett Hammond and Cody Law. Cody was a D2 national champ. Now he's fighting for Bellator. We were all at the same weight at 165 fighting for the spot. And I think we were all probably top 15 guys in the country. That was a pretty crazy year. But Shakur and I were sort of the two that were getting to go in all the competitions. So we were flip flopping in and out. And ultimately, I ended up getting to wrestle at nationals that year and lost in the round of 16, which I was expecting to All American that year. So that was a bit of a disappointment for me. Um, but that was my junior year. And then my senior year, I bumped up to 174 because Vincenzo Joseph came in the lineup at 165. Bo had moved up to 184. So then again, it was Shakur and I at 174. And me and Shakur were both ranked for sure top 8 in the country that year. And both of us, I think both of us could have contended for a national title that year. Um, so I beat him in wrestle offs, and then he beat me later in a tournament at an open tournament that we both got to wrestle at. So we had flip flop in and out, and then he ended up getting injured, so I had sort of the spot for that year. And I think I was 10-1 at the time. And then Mark Hall, who was the top recruit out of high school, that he came in as a true freshman. He got the itch to compete, and so Mark and I wrestled off. He beat me in overtime at wrestle offs, and then he won the national tournament that year. So I didn't get to sort of finish out my senior year, but it was definitely like the best I was ever competing. And but obviously Mark was a outstanding competitor, and if I was going to lose to anybody, would have wanted it to be him. So he ended up winning the nationals as a true freshman that year.
Yeah. But I mean, that's another challenge too. I mean, you're having the best year of your college career, and everything's coming together, and then you have a very very close wrestle off that ends up kind of dictating the end of that year. Uh, Obviously that must have been another challenge that you kind of had to overcome. Um, how did you kind of deal with that? And then we mentioned this earlier, but you also got your MBA at Penn State as well. So while you're getting your MBA, were you also in the wrestling room training and competing that whole time as well?
Yeah. So on the first part, it was definitely hard not getting to compete that year, especially just with things sort of coming together for me finally in terms of me competing and finding success. Um, but once it happened, there was like probably a week period where I was pretty salty about it. But
Like
then,
anyone would
uh,
be.
but in wrestling, it's very like cut and dry, right? If you lose the match, then there's not really anyone you can put it on besides yourself. So although I was really disappointed, um, eventually I had to like sort of change my mindset to okay, I just need to like I can't be bringing bad energy into the room. I need to support my teammates because every year, we're competing for a national team title. And
Yeah, and
so,
also,
um,
you've been on the other side of that coin too. You mentioned you had a wrestle off with Shakur, so it's like, you've kind of been on both sides of it, so I'm sure you could kind of relate.
100%. Yeah. And and it happens all the time at Penn State. Like there's a lot of guys that are in that room that you've never heard of that could potentially, be national champs. Like a good example is Anthony Cassar, who trains with Bo up in State College now doing
Now Fights
MMA.
in Fury. Yep.
Yeah. So he didn't get to compete for Penn State like on the starting lineup until his senior year. And then his senior year, he makes the national tournament and then wins and beats Gable Stevenson in the finals. So if it were not for that year,
He beat Gable Stevenson that year? I didn't
yeah,
realize that's
yep,
who he beat. Wow. Okay.
yep, yep. So that happens a lot, and just seeing that, like, it's just, I don't know. I mean, you see it happen to other people, so that was like that was part of it as well. But I knew I just had to support the team and get in a good mindset and help the other guys prep to win the team title. So that's sort of what my focus shifted to. And then luckily, I was able to do pretty well in school. So I'd gotten a fellowship to go get my MBA. So I went straight through and um, got that 100% covered and got a stipend to go to school and get my master's. And my focus just became on my career at that point. So I always thought I wanted to work on Wall Street and work in the hedge fund space. So I was on that path, working with, well, I'll go through the MBA first. I went through school, didn't really go in the room too much. Um, 2 weeks before my MBA graduation, I decided to like go back in and train. And I
Got
had
the
been in
itch.
sporadically before then, but I went back in and was training with the guys, and I felt really good. And I was like, "Hey, coach, like, could I come with you guys to the U.S. Open?" And so I had just under 2 weeks to train for the U.S. Open, and ended up making the semifinals. That
That's
was in
crazy.
2019.
That's
Yeah,
crazy. On 2 weeks of training. That's wild.
yeah, and I also had like very limited freestyle experience because I never really wrestled much in the summer, so completely new style, and was able to make it to the semi. So I All Americaned at the senior level for freestyle, and then that qualified me for World Team Trials. So made it to the semis of World Team Trials, and semis of U.S. Open. I lost to Derringer, and then I wrestled Zahid in the semis at World Team Trials. So it was just fun to come back and compete, and like that even helped me with competing even more because I had absolutely nothing to
Yeah.
lose. And that's when I found that I compete at my best when I'm not really focused on winning or losing. I'm just doing it because I want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, to be able to at that level too, like I guess I also went to grad school too, and you end up being very focused on just your academics and your schooling, and you're really not like training that hard. You just like don't really have the time. And to be able to kind of just, I'm assuming you're maybe lifting weights a bit, maybe running, just kind of like casual. You weren't even doing any of that. You're just straight
No,
from like the desk to competing.
I
That
mean,
that's
I was,
that's wild. That's
yeah,
insane,
yeah.
dude.
I spent like pretty much all my time focused on the MBA, and then I travel home and stuff. But yeah, didn't go into the room very much. And after my undergrad career, I stopped lifting pretty much completely. Um, so it was crazy. I was definitely out of shape at the tournament. Like
Yeah.
I could tell a big difference in my cardio, but just the fact that I was able to go out and just freely compete and like throw it all on the line and not
Yeah.
worry about the result, that's what really helped me, I think.
I'm sure you probably learned so much just mentally from that too. You're like, damn, this is where I'm at. That's
Yeah,
yeah, that's awesome.
yeah, it was
Okay,
fun.
so then you had that kind of, I guess last hurrah, and then you graduated, and then you got a job with a company in Houston. And is that when you made the move?
Made the move to Houston, yeah. So
Yeah.
I interned for Exxon in between years of the MBA, and then I went full time with them afterwards. I was working with our trading group, and then started getting recruited by some hedge funds, like Citadel was one of them up in Connecticut, and that's what I always thought I wanted to do. And then again, just sort of had a crazy like moment that made me sort of take a step back and just put everything in perspective again. And when I was down here, I was helping our buddy, mutual friend Domingo, get ready for some UFC fights and stuff. So I'd gotten exposed to Muay Thai and Jiu Jitsu a little bit. And I started doing Jiu Jitsu just casually. And then sort of had a moment that made me sort of just rethink priorities again and ended up deciding to leave MMA. And I know Domingo had part of a role in that. He'd always talk to me just about that, you know, he thought that I could be really successful there and
Yeah.
just started kind of getting that in my head. But just sort of took a step back and saw that that's what I actually wanted to do, and then left the corporate world to do that. So
Yeah, and that's around the time we met. I guess just a little background information for some folks listening. So he's talking about Domingo Pilarte. He's a MMA fighter, former UFC fighter out of Houston, Texas. He's one of Gino and I's mutual friends, and he trains at Revolution Dojo. And he's actually, I think that the person who put me and you together. He made me aware of this guy Gino because me and Dom started training, and Dom's like, "Oh man, you got to wrestle with Gino. Gino's so good." And I was like, "Okay, like my wrestling's trash. Let me come learn." I think that's when I started coming to your classes, and coming up in martial arts, I've had a lot of people uh, coach. I've been to a lot of classes where people have coached wrestling. I've been around like a lot of high school wrestlers and even lower level collegiate wrestlers. I remember after wrestling with you, that's where I really realized like there's definitely levels to this, levels to the technique, levels to the abilities. And a lot of times I'd have people show me some like a double leg or a single leg, and then you'd go to do it and it just wouldn't work. And oftentimes it's because they're kind of missing some key details. And I remember going with you and everything you showed me, like I was able to do right away and I was able to do in competition. And that's where like I really like saw that next level of legit wrestling. And for those of you interested, we'll talk more about this in a bit. But Gino is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Athletes Ocean, and he has a group on there where he drops weekly wrestling technique videos that are catered to people doing wrestling and trying to get better at their takedowns for BJJ. And obviously, he has a background in MMA and pure wrestling as well. But I would check it out. There's no better person I've learned from than Gino. So definitely recommend that. But
appreciate
that's
that,
about the
John.
time. Of course, of course. Yeah, and I truly mean that. But that's around the time that me and Gino met and then started training together. And that kind of, I think, probably opened up your next phase of your life. You went from being, collegiate wrestler to living the corporate life in business and trading. And then after you did that, you're like, I thought I wanted this, but now that I'm here, this doesn't feel like the right thing for me. And you walked away from a high-paying, lucrative job and industry to pursue fighting in a cage in your underwear. So that's obviously that takes a lot of courage in and of itself to step away from the career you had and pursue your goals. And I think that's something that a lot of people have a fear of. Maybe there's something else they would rather be doing in their life, but they have some sense of security and they feel hesitant to give that up, and they feel maybe some some fear or anxiety about that. Um, what would be some advice you could give to people who are maybe you in another alternative reality, who are sitting there and kind of dragging their feet and not sure if they really have what it takes or if they should make those changes in their life? What would you tell them?
Oh man, this is like one of my favorite topics. I know we had talked a lot about it, and you recently went on your leave of absence to pursue what you wanted to do. So when you, it's such a scary thing, and I've heard other people talk about this. Like Alex Ramosi talks about it a lot. He was afraid to leave like a normal job to pursue his whole entrepreneurial thing that he has going on. But man, that was probably one of the scariest things I've ever had to do. Um, what had helped me is actually right before I made the leap, I had sort of an encounter and was saved by Christ. So that's something that really changed my perspective um, and made me like confident in taking the jump. I just feel like God was calling me to do that at the time. But I would say that um, like there's very practical ways to set up your ability to leave and pursue what you really want to do, right? So some of those things, or at least some of the things I did is I took a look at where we were financially, my wife and I started setting up some passive streams of income. So we like house hacked our house. So we have a room on the first floor that we ran an Airbnb out of, and that pretty much covered our mortgage. And we found some other creative ways to sort of create side income, and that really freed me up to just be like, okay, this is how much money we have coming in a month. This is how much we'll have coming out. I'm like, how long is that going to give me to be able to find success and start earning from fighting or ocean or whatever it is? And it just allowed me to sort of look at it and be like, okay, I have 2 years. Like that's going to be easy. I'm going to easily be able to start making money from fighting in 2 years, or ocean, or whatever my plan was going forward, right? And whatever that is for you, if you're in that position, um, just take a look practically, like how long do you have to make something successful? And once you see if you have a 12-month to 2-year period, I think that'll give you confidence in being like, okay, I can make this work within that time frame. And if it doesn't, worst case scenarios, you always go back to the job that you didn't like for a little bit and get back on your feet, and then you can always try it again. So
And at least you know you tried.
exactly,
You
like
don't
you
grow old and
definitely
wonder what if.
100%. Imagine looking back and like that was one thing for me is imagine I look back and had the opportunity to, win a world championship in MMA and I never gave it a go. That would be the worst feeling. So, and I've become passionate ever since I've left about freaking convincing my friends and people to leave their jobs. So, it's funny you bring this up because I know I was doing that a little bit with you, and I've talked to some other friends as well that I'm currently still working on. I think you're the first one to actually take the leap, so that I
Let's
was talking
go.
to. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, what do you think? How do you like? How do you feel so far? I know it's still early, but
Yeah, so for those listening, I took a leave of absence from my job about 6 months at least, as of last week, to pursue uh, martial arts and podcasting, and then do some traveling and spend some time with family. For me, um, I think maybe a lot of people can relate to this, but sometimes there's life events that happen, and they make you realize that uh, you don't have a long time on this earth. For me, it was the passing of a close loved one. And this is a person who really inspired me. And they were the kind of person who was fearless in life. Like they took chances. Maybe someone told them this is not a good decision, but they knew in their heart it was the right decision. And they lived it and did it. And I think when this person passed, it really made me reflect on a lot of things. And I think I just kind of came to the realization that like you only get one shot. Once you live through your 20s are over. You don't get a second shot. Once you live through your 30s, that's over. You don't get another shot. And certain things you have to do at certain times in your life. And I think for me, it was kind of just having that realization and then being okay with the worst case scenario. And I think you maybe what you talked about creating a plan. I think that helps give you an idea of like what your true objective situation is. So if you can take time to plan your finances, find ways to save money, find ways to come up with alternative streams of income, I think you can start to like chart out what exactly your situation is. You can maybe also chart out how much do you need to save to be able to give yourself, a good amount of time to pursue those goals. But I think it's a combination of the planning and then of realizing that you only get one life, and once you move past some of your windows of opportunity, that's it. For instance, with you and your MMA career, if you waited till you were like 35 to do this, that would be probably too late to pick up all the skills you need to pursue your goals. So some of these things they don't need to be done maybe like today or tomorrow, but they need to be done within a certain time window. And so what you can do today or tomorrow is start planning. So that's what I would say. I'd say start planning and start finding ways to save money, and there's nothing better than a plan. And then the confidence to do that I think is also important. But what I'd say is sometimes you have to consider, how will you feel when you're old? When you're old and you look back at this time in your life, will you have wished you did something different? And I think if you feel like you would probably wish you did something different, then do that thing like now. Don't
Yeah.
look back on your life and regret. Do it now.
Yeah, that was really good. I liked how you said like be okay with the worst case scenario, because you think about it, like the worst case scenario isn't going to be that bad. You're probably going to be in the same position that you were before.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. I think we in our heads we always think of the worst case scenario as being so catastrophically worse than it actually is. But I
yeah,
think what it is though is I think, and it's like all humans feel like this. You get kind of comfortable and then you get afraid of change. And I think that's the scariest part. I think people sometimes confuse like the fear of change with having some terrible worst case scenario. And often your worst case scenario is like you just return to like a job or career that maybe you like is okay, but it's not like what you'd rather be doing. That's the worst case scenario. It's not like you'll be homeless or anything. So I think
yep,
part of it is just trying to be realistic about what scenarios might play themselves out, and then planning for it too.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. So you made this change. For you, when you like walked away, uh, you had a couple different things, right? So one thing was the MMA career, and then one thing was to start this company, Athletes Ocean. I want to kind of start with the MMA career, and then we can move on to Athletes Ocean. With MMA, what was it about it that made you kind of fall in love? Because, to give up this career and pursue this, you had to have a real love for the sport. So can you tell me a little bit about how you got into it? And then what was it about it that you kind of felt like touched your soul, where you're like, this is what I want to spend my life doing?
Yeah, so for me, this is, um, I'd mentioned that I had that encounter with Christ, and that's like an interesting topic, but I feel like God, God told me exactly, where He wanted me, and MMA was what He had sort of called me to do, and and that was the biggest part of it, right? I want to make sure that I'm I'm operating whatever it is that God is calling me to. So I always try and listen and hear what God's saying to me, and He'll speak to me in different ways at times. But that was the big thing. And then the other thing is when I would train and I would go do jujitsu or Muay Thai or whatever it was, man, I just always felt great. Like I've always loved training, always loved martial arts, and um, there was still some uncertainty at the time, like when I first made that leap. But sort of what confirmed it for me was the first time I competed. So went and did the MMA competition, came out of it, and it was like the best feeling I had ever had. Even though it was at such a smaller scale than what I was doing when I was at Penn State. Like it was an amateur fight in somewhere in Louisiana, and I came out of it and I just felt like, man, I don't know. It was just a different type of feeling than, and I had competed in front of like sold out stadiums with Penn State Wrestling, like at our basketball stadium that says 17,000 people, and man, something was just different about the MMA competition. So That was a big confirmation for me. Um, and then recently, my last fight, every fight since then, I felt that, but this last fight I feel like God was really telling me I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I got to have Coach Thompson in my corner, which was a big part of me moving up to
Mr. T.
Simpsonville. Exactly, Mr. T. Yeah. So just moving up there and being with that team, I really feel at home, and that was a big part of the move. Obviously they have like the best striking in the world from a technical standpoint, but the culture was the big reason for me moving up there. Um, so just getting to experience that first fight with that team and with Coach T in the corner, I just feel like, man, I felt right at home. So
Yeah. So I guess let's maybe just give the folks listening a little bit of a background there. So Geno originally made the transition from his career to fighting in Houston. He was training at Revolution Dojo, where we were both training jiu-jitsu and grappling, and then he was doing MMA at Houston Muay Thai there. But during his time there, he was able to get some training in at Upstate Karate with Wonderboy, Stephen Thompson, and all the other great folks up there, Mr. T, the head coach, and Steve Deviney, the wrestling coach, Weston Wilson, another UFC fighter there, and they have plenty of really, really talented up-and-comers. And originally got brought out there to help Wonderboy train for the Gilbert Burns fight. Gilbert Burns obviously being a strong grappler, and yourself as well, similar size, so that made sense. And then you started making trips up there more regularly just to get training in because you started to realize, how good and how effective they are with their striking there. And then it was maybe the couple months ago, like 4 or 5 months ago, that you made the full time transition to move to South Carolina, and now you're
yep.
training full time at Upstate Karate. Tell everyone a bit about that place. It's for me, it's one of it is the best place I've ever trained striking. And as you said, the culture there is amazing. Some of the best coaches, but it's also just kind of reminds me a bit about what you were saying about Penn State, where you show up every day and it's just fun. It's just good vibes, good training, but also it's an enjoyable environment to be in. So tell us a bit about your time there and what it's been like this past 5 months training there full time.
Yeah, it's been awesome. So I grew up in a really small town. So Houston was obviously a big difference for me. I liked Houston and got a lot of blessings from being here, but ultimately I knew I wanted something that was a little bit more rural, even though Greenville it's not like a small town or anything. It's like a mid-sized city, but Simpsonville is sort of in the rural parts of it. So it's nice to sort of get back in that environment and but yeah, the big thing for me was the culture. And again, I saw how important that was at Penn State and how that ultimately like will really help lead to success, just surrounding yourself with people that have good values and a similar vision. So on those trips up there, that's like the thing that stood out to me. Every time I went up there, I was having a ton of fun and yeah, it's just a good environment. So um, Coach T and Stephan and the rest of the folks there, like it sort of feels like a family environment. And Coach T leads the team like he's a Christian as well, and so he leads it by a lot of those like Christian values. And so that's something that like really resonates with me. And yeah, it's been great. And obviously the striking is like it's a very unique style and it's really dynamic. So in boxing, like you're mostly going to be focused on your hands and uh, you're not really throwing kicks, right? So you could, as I've seen some wrestlers go into MMA and just focus on their boxing, or you could do Muay Thai where you're focused on hands and kicks, but your footwork, you're not really moving your feet very much. Karate, you're moving your feet like crazy. You have crazy like dynamic kicks, and you have the hands as well. So it's probably the hardest style to pick up, like in terms of like total skills that you need to learn. But I feel like once you pick it up, it's the most dynamic and the most effective style to blend with wrestling. So um, when I was looking at that style, I knew it was going to be more of like a long term play because it's going to take some time to really develop it. But man, in 5 months, just being up there full time now, the amount that like my game has changed in that 5 months has been crazy. So it's been really good, and I think um, it's sort of just matching with my long-term vision for my MMA career, which what sort of my vision for myself when it comes to MMA is when I fight, I don't want people to watch my fight and know that I'm a wrestler. I want them to watch it and like be like, man, what's his base? Like, is he a striker? Does he come from wrestling? And I want people to watch me and kind of have that in their mind. So that's sort of my vision for myself.
Yeah, I'm excited to see more of your fights now too, because uh, the time that we like took a couple trips out there, you're getting really good training in. But we'd go there for 2 weeks. You train twice a day, every day for 2 weeks, and you come back home, and then you try to practice those drills. But it's different when you're there every night, and you have Wonderboy, Mr. T, Weston, all the other people like making those micro changes. Because sometimes you can drill stuff that feels correct, but when you have like a real expert looking at you, they can make all those small changes that make such a big difference. Um, and we said about karate, I think is absolutely true. And I think one thing, like one athlete that you've always reminded me a lot of, kind of in your approach, your professional approach to martial arts, but even just from a physical perspective, is George St. Pierre. So George St. Pierre, a great wrestler, great grappler. He's a natural athlete, and he takes things like very professional. I think in MMA, he's one of the first people to actually pay for like a real camp and do it the way like a professional athlete would train. And I see a lot of those commonalities with you. And another thing that GSP said is that everyone talks about how good his offensive wrestling is, but what he said is he learned all of his footwork for wrestling from karate. He has a
Mm-hmm.
background in karate. That's the traditional martial art he grew up doing, and a lot of his closing of distance for his double legs, they all came from like that karate foot movement. And I think for athletes who are explosive athletes, I think karate is like one of the hardest styles because you can move in and out so quick and you can play with timing and level changes. And if you start to like move up and down, they don't know if you're going to shoot a double or if you're going to hit them with a kick or hit them with a punch. And once they start to guess, then you can start to make reads and change it up on them. So it's very very effective and exciting style for the fans, and obviously it's paying off. Your first two amateur fights, you whooped the people's asses, but it was decisions. And then your last amateur fight, you got the finish by submission, and then these first two pro fights, they're like complete dominations and finishes. And in this last fight, you finished your opponent with some nasty ground and pound, some great elbows, and some great knees. And you really, I think, are showing more of your whole game. And I know you still probably feel like you have a lot more to show. For those of you, we kind of mentioned it earlier, but he broke his hand in the first round. So he had to fight another 2 rounds with a broken hand and still managed to finish this guy via TKO. And it was like a horrific fight. There was like blood everywhere. It was crazy. Definitely go on UFC Fight Pass or YouTube, wherever it is, and check that fight out. But it was exciting to me as a fan and as a friend to see like the jump and progression in your striking and your ground and pound that you've made in the past 5 months. So I'm excited to see where you're at in another 5 months. Um,
Yeah, I think it's going to be, man, I'm excited too. So I've been trying to like plan out my training now with this freaking thing. Obviously, I can't, like
Kicks.
my training. Yeah, yeah, my train, obviously I can't really grapple. My training lately has been pretty much all striking. I'm not really doing any jiu-jitsu, very little wrestling. So my plan is to just really work on my footwork, like my foundational footwork and feigning, and then working kicks as well. So my side kick is something I've been focused on developing a lot lately, and then my round kicks, which is just the lead leg, um, snapping it up real quick. So that's something I've been developing as well. But yeah, it's been exciting. My first two fights, I just kind of jumped into without like I got the takedown right, and then I was just trying to knock the dude out with 7 ounce gloves, which is really hard to do in amateurs because you can't throw elbows, you can only punch them. It's really hard to like control somebody and punch them without being able to like throw elbows to finish the fight. But then that third fight, we got the rear naked choke, and that's something I want to focus on more is adding more submissions, hunting for more submissions in my fights, especially now with this freaking thing, like I'd rather just submit somebody than punch them. So sort of learned my lesson.
Safer. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, especially in these regional fights. So that's going to be a focus going forward. And then this fight, I was planning on striking a lot on my feet, but yeah, I broke my hand 2 minutes in. So then sort of had to get creative to get the finish with the elbows and stuff on the ground. But I feel like I have a lot to show on my feet that I didn't get to show. And that's what I'm excited for in my next fight. I'll probably look to throw some hands, throw some kicks and stuff, and um, show off that skill set I've been developing a little bit more.
Yeah, it's good, because your future opponents, they didn't really get to see like what you're fully capable of, and even if they did see it and you showed all your skills in this last fight, you will still progress before you come to your next fight. But there's still like a lot of secrets and a lot of progress you've made that they can't just watch film and study now. And also now they
Yeah,
have to worry if they get taken down, are they gonna get split open? Are they gonna get submitted? Like there's a lot of fear that they have to have now. And then when you're
yeah.
standing, your footwork's so good, it's like it's hard to like pin you in a corner to try to take you down, or try to like get you against the cage to land some hard shots. So uh, I'm glad I don't have to fight you. I'll say that much.
That's
But
one thing after that fight. I was like, man, that was a bloody mess. And like I was thinking about just being in that person's shoes. Like
yeah,
that would be like the worst fight to have is somebody just on top of you, just freaking elbowing you in the face or
yeah.
elbowing you in the ribs or so I'm hoping that I don't know, man. We'll see. Like hopefully I can continue to get fights on the regional level. I think that fight might make it a little bit uh harder for me to land like future opponents.
Yeah, so speaking of that, what do you, when you look to the future, what are kind of some of your plans for the next year and then the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. So I want to fight again in December for Fury again. I signed a 4 fight contract with them. I'm hoping that with 3 or 4 fights, I'll be able to start, marketing myself for the Contender Series. I think I'm at that point. So, um, fight again in December, get a quick finish. Hopefully, that would be enough to convince the UFC to bring me on. Um, if not, we'll do another fight or two next year. But just being active, competing, and then getting into the UFC and um, just sort of seeing what like Bo is doing is getting me really excited about getting in there and competing. And very early on in my MMA training, I got to travel a bit and train with some good guys from other gyms, like some of the top guys at 155 and 170. And I went with them when I was first starting and felt like I could beat them in a fight. So now that I've developed my striking and everything, I think that, it's not unrealistic within 2 years to be looking to get the belt at 155. And my vision for myself is, I want to go in and just have fun competing, but it's like obviously I have some goals. Um, I want to win the belt at 155 and 170. I think that I can compete at both weight classes. I have a good build for, going at either weight. So first I'll probably start out in the UFC at 155 and then eventually move up to 170 after
So at 155, you can be Hands of Steel. At 170, you can be Meatball Morelli. We'll
there we
switch up the
go.
name depending on the weight class.
That's actually a good point. I like that.
Um, yeah, that's exciting, man. Penn State, they're about to take over the UFC too. Because I mean, we have Bo, who's obviously the first one to break through, get in the UFC, and he's obviously already starching people and making a big name for himself. And then coming, hot on his heels is Anthony Cassar, and I believe he's fighting at 205
It's either
or
205 or
heavyweight.
heavyweight. It's one of the
Okay,
two. I'm not sure.
yeah. So I mean, he's an incredible prospect as well. The guy could probably make 205 if he wanted to, but he's good enough as a smaller heavyweight to beat a Gable Stevenson. So that guy's a complete monster as well. And then we have you, who's already 5 fights deep in his MMA career and already finishing everyone like from here on out.
I think that you're definitely going to see the Penn State guys have a ton of success. So, obviously Bo's been crushing it. Kassar's an absolute beast, and my business partner Nolf is considering coming in as well. And then you have the young guys now at Penn State that are, now that they sort of have like some trailblazers leading the way, you're going to see a lot of them come in as well. And then you have Bo, who opened, his gym up in State College. So I think that'll be a natural transition for a lot of the guys that are
Yeah.
either, maybe they stay at Penn State and continue like looking for Olympic medals and things. But as they're doing that, they can already start coming into Bo's training facility and starting to develop their MMA and sort of build an appetite for and showing themselves that they actually like want to do it and they get to test it out and see that they do love martial arts. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to remind me of like the college days, and it's going to be cool. Like, getting to watch each other compete, go to each other's events, try and outdo one another with like cool finishes and stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun to compete alongside those guys.
Yeah. So you talked a bit about Nolf before. So not only, is he like an accomplished wrestler at both the collegiate level and then the senior level. And he may make a transition to MMA as well. I'm assuming perhaps after the next Olympic cycle. But he's also your business partner in Athletes Ocean. How did you guys start this company? Where did the idea come from? And can you tell us a bit about how you guys got started and what Athletes Ocean is?
Yeah. So the company started out, I had made a trip up to State College, and Jason and I were talking about just how the technology in like online learning, the current online learning platforms, especially the ones associated with martial arts, they don't really leverage tech. And we were just talking about like different things that we could do. And originally the idea sort of spun up as, hey, let's make a platform where we can do like online video lessons with people. But then we started talking, and I started researching the tech on my side and figuring out like all the different things we could do. And I was like, I sort of came up with the idea eventually evolved from us discussing and coming up with the idea for like an online marketplace for martial arts instruction, and that's really where we're at now. So we wanted to make it in a way that you, as a martial artist who, you probably have a following on Instagram and things like that, you can plug in to our platform and immediately start selling courses and subscriptions and uploading content and start monetizing your skill set right away. And then, from the customer side, we want to make a platform where you can connect with your favorite athletes in a way that's engaging and more than just buying their course and then never speaking with them and downloading the course on your phone and just, watching through it. Like, I think most people, when they buy courses from like Fanatics or whatever it is, most people don't even end up getting through the courses just because, I don't know, it's just not a very engaging experience. So that's sort of the conversation that Nolf and I had that ended up leading and evolving into what Ocean is right now. So that's a background of kind of how we got started.
And one thing that I've noticed about your guys' platform that's really interesting and I think engaging is the fact that it's also sort of like a social network in the sense that you can release an instructional or you can release a video, whatever the case may be, but people can kind of directly engage with you. They can like a video, they can comment, they can ask you questions. You can set up privates through the platform. Like there's a lot of options and different creative ways to engage and learn on the platform as well.
Yeah. So that's that's where we're at now is kind of interesting because whenever you start a company, you have to eventually launch the product, and that was something that we debated as a team because we had this initial vision for how we wanted it. We had built it out, and we recognize like the product isn't perfect right now. We're a new company, and we launched our MVP 7 months ago, and that's still the phase that we're on now is the MVP, which stands for like in startup life, that's minimal viable product. So it's like, what's the worst version of your product that you're comfortable bringing to the marketplace? And so that's what we launched with, and we're still on that current phase. But right now is really interesting time because Jason and I we've actually been working a lot this past week on taking the feedback that we've gotten from customers and then boiling it down and figuring out exactly what people want from like online instruction platform. So we're in the process right now of building out the strategy for our next phase of the platform, which is going to be completely like custom developed product. So we're expecting to hopefully release that within the next 2 to 3 months. And I think that's just going to completely change the game for us because it's going to be tailor made for exactly what the customers are looking for. And it's going to allow us to provide like a much better user experience. And we also want to release like a native mobile app with that launch as well. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to pull that off within the 3 month time frame.
Yeah. For those of you who are listening to this or are interested, if you guys want to go on Athletes Ocean, you could just type it in Google, Athletes Ocean, and it's the first thing that comes up. Um, but it's interesting. If you just join the site, you guys are already giving away some great free content. Uh, one of the, I guess, one of my favorite types of snap downs, and I think something that some Penn wrestlers are also pretty well known for, is the overtie snaps. And I see Nolf, he has a free instructional on the overtie snaps. You have a free instructional in there on wrestling takedowns that you found very effective for BJJ and wrestling. And then if you guys want to, if anyone wants to buy instructionals, one thing I like is that, essentially almost all these big Penn State wrestlers, they have videos on here. But it kind of ranges sort of sometimes in how long the instructionals are. Sometimes you get an instructional that's like 8 hours and you're like, it can feel kind of daunting. But on here, there's instructionals that go, anywhere from 10 minutes to like, 50 minutes or something. Seems like they're a little bit more in bite-sized pieces, and there's a little bit more variability in terms of like how much they cost and how long it'll take to consume them. There's instructionals on here like from Bo Nickel that's like $39. There's one from like RBY that's 15 minutes. It's like $29. There's a lot of kind of variability on there too, and it's most of these prices too for all these top instructionals are under $50. I'd recommend anyone who's like listening to this go online and check it out, and it's free to join, and you get just some great free content. And sort of like if you're on Instagram, you can just follow someone. You can also do that on here too. So if you follow someone like Geno or Nolf or any of these other guys, you can just follow them, and there's plenty of free content. So you're really kind of leaving a lot on the table if you don't and you're interested in this stuff. And you guys
Yeah.
also, you have quite a big and growing market, not just for wrestling, but also jiu-jitsu. And it's called Athletes Ocean, not Athletes Wrestling or Athletes Grappling. I presume that's because you guys are also going to be expanding to more sports in this combat world or this combat space, maybe even more. What are you guys' thoughts in terms of where you see this company going?
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Good point. So when our plan is to really like buckle down in the martial arts space, but we wanted to have one cohesive brand that we could put striking, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu under because we felt like the market. There's a lot of cross pollination between the market. So we were gonna we launched the company as Athletes Ocean, kind of similar to like Flow Wrestling, where you have Flow Sports as the parent company, and eventually we might sub-brand into multiple, like Wrestling Ocean, Grappling Ocean, Striking Ocean. That's still something that we're debating, but yeah, we definitely plan to expand in the martial arts space because just Jason and I, with our backgrounds at Penn State, we're connected with pretty much all the top fighters, top grapplers, and top wrestlers in the world. And so early on, we've been really focused on the wrestling market and using that as like a test or like beta beta test because our app still is in like the beta version. Um, and our strategy is to just collect customer feedback in that market, figure out what people want, and then develop this second phase of the app, which is where we're at right now. As soon as we launch this new phase of the app, we're just going to push, we're going to be pushing harder into jujitsu and striking as well. We already have a few instructionals filmed there, but we're really going to sort of ramp up the operations in that space. And then once we build out in the martial arts space and sort of establish credibility and start producing strong cash flow for the company, that's going to free us up to create other opportunities in other niche sports eventually. So that was definitely the idea behind Athletes Ocean as a whole. And, we really want the company to be known as Ocean. So just like Ocean is the central app, and then you have the sub brands under each, very similar to how Flow is structured.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I also like about your guys' site is like, let's say I'm interested in like a particular sport. I can filter by like wrestling, grappling, MMA, whatever it is. But I can also filter by positions. So like, let's say, I do jiu-jitsu, right? Let's say one thing I want to work on a lot is my hand fighting. You guys, I can just click on positions, filter on hand fighting, and then I can see all the instructionals that cover hand fighting. So I think just being able to search not just for, the instructor's name or the sport, but also particular positions and levels, whether it's going to be beginner, intermediate, or advanced, it's pretty useful, I think, when trying to find content that relates to your interests or what you're trying to develop.
You get me excited, dude. So the new platform, it's going to be very much like the search experience is going to be improved drastically, and all the filtering options as well. So the version of the site you're seeing now is pretty good, but what we're going to end up bringing out in the next phase is just going to take it to another level. So once we do that, then you're going to see, us shift our focus from developing the best platform possible. Once we launch that, then it's going to be focused on bringing you guys the best instructors that we possibly can and the most content that we can. So it's really exciting times, but it's sort of right now we're in the calm before the storm of, we're just sort of prepping ourselves to end up going after massive growth. So
let me ask you a question. Are you guys going to have a cell phone app?
yeah, we're going to develop a mobile app. So right now we have a progressive web app, which is sort of a new, it's kind of a new concept in the tech space, but it's not widely used. So it's hard to get distribution with it. But what it is it's basically a mobile app, but you have to hit the share button on your iPhone when you're on Safari and then hit add to home screen, and you'll basically have an app on your phone. But sometimes it's hard to get users to do that. And so that's the reason why we're going to end up developing this native app. But the good thing about the progressive web app is if you have an app on the App Store, any in-app purchase, you have to pay Apple 30%, which is just crazy. But that's one nice thing. It's allowed us to avoid paying 30% off the top of every sale to Apple. But just the distribution that you get with a mobile app, we think it's worth it, and it's going to give our customers a better experience. So we're going to end up bringing that out.
That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of, I guess, one of those behind the scenes things that you don't always realize. That makes a lot of sense. Is there anything else you want to tell us about Athletes Ocean, or anything else we should know?
I would say just, I would just communicate our vision. Like we plan to bring the best technology into the space. We know we're not there right now, but we're putting the right pieces in place to make that happen in terms of trying to bring the right people onto the team to lead the technology. So that's really where our focus is now. And as soon as we get that, then just expect us to bring on a ton of content. We're still sort of testing right now too. So if you guys get on the site, we're looking for as much feedback as possible because we want to make the experience as best as we can for y'all. So I'd love to have you guys join and sort of help us in these early stages, just build out the best product we can for the market.
Yeah, and I guess two things I would say. One would be if there's any athletes who you guys would like to be able to kind of engage with on this kind of technical level, definitely reach out to them on social media and encourage them to join, because the fact that you can really communicate with your fans and communicate with people who you're learning from on here, I think is one of the strongest parts of this website. And I know you guys have also designed this to not just be for like a professional athlete, so like I say, like a Bo Nickel or yourself or Nolf, but let's say if you have like a high school wrestling team or you have a jiu-jitsu gym, if you want to have like one location where, whatever I teach at my jiu-jitsu gym or my wrestling school, I can record that content, put it online, and actually can have like a sort of like an instructional and a community place for my students. You guys also have that capability on here too. So it's more than just instructionals. It's also a community and kind of like a repository for any gym or organization that does any sort of martial arts.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you did a good job explaining it. Sorry, I should have jumped into that a little bit more at the beginning, but basically the two main features on Ocean right now is you have instructional videos, which we have a forum section that you can discuss with the actual instructor himself. And then we have subscriptions, which is kind of like a Patreon style where you subscribe to an athlete and you get exclusive access to um, all the content that they post, which are usually shorter clips, like anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes, and you get access to their library and any new uploads that they upload, and that's a monthly price. So those are the two main features right now. And then, as you had mentioned earlier, we plan on bringing out more features in the future, including an online private lesson booking system and things like that. But right now, we're trying to keep the app as simple as possible before we move on to this next phase. So you'll see some of those newer features start coming out soon.
Awesome. So again, those of you guys interested, which should be everybody if you're listening to this podcast, go into Google, type in Athletes Ocean. It'll be the first thing to pop up. You can also go to Instagram, and they have a Athletes Ocean site that gives out a lot of great content as well. It's athletes.ocean on Instagram, and Geno is on Instagram at Geno Morelli MMA, all one word. So make sure you follow him and his journey and stay up to date with everything he's doing. Geno, thank you so much for joining us, and it's been a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Dog. Appreciate you having me on.